What does it take to pull off the perfect crime? Is it sheer cunning, meticulous planning, or the cold confidence that every detail has been accounted for? She believed she had it all figured out. Every step she took was deliberate, every variable measured and controlled. The scene she left behind was immaculate. No signs of struggle, no careless fingerprints, no trace that might hint at wrongdoing. It was as if nothing had happened at all. The room was silent, eerily so, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if holding its breath, waiting. No chaos, no frantic attempts to cover mistakes, just a calm, calculated order. From the outside, everything seemed untouched, pristine, flawless. Nothing to suggest that beneath the surface, a well-orchestrated deception had taken place. She had crafted an illusion so convincing that even the sharpest eyes would miss the cracks. She moved like a shadow, unseen and untraceable. Confidence radiated from her every action, the kind of certainty that comes with knowing all the angles, all the risks. The plan had been rehearsed countless times in her mind, every possible outcome anticipated and neutralized. She was certain she would walk away free, that no one would ever connect her to what had happened here. Investigators came and went, sweeping the scene with their tools and expertise. But they found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, no clues left behind. The evidence that should have been there was either expertly concealed or never existed in the first place. It was as if the crime had been committed by someone who had mastered invisibility. Days turned into weeks, and still the case remained cold. No suspects, no leads, no breakthroughs. The perfect crime, it seemed, had been pulled off flawlessly, until, quietly, a single detail began to emerge. So small, so insignificant that it barely caught anyone's attention. It was a detail no one thought to question, no one even noticed at first. Not even her. That tiny inconsistency started to nag at the edges of the investigation. A whisper in the silence that refused to be ignored. It was a thread pulling at the fabric of the entire case, threatening to unravel everything she had worked so hard to conceal. The illusion of control began to crack, and the confidence that had seemed unshakable started to waver. What was once untouchable now seemed vulnerable. The perfect crime was not as perfect as she believed, and that single overlooked detail, quiet, almost invisible, would soon seal her fate in ways she never imagined. Every move, every whispered word, every glance exchanged, all of it is part of a delicate web woven with precision. Yet, within this intricacy, the faintest tremor can ripple outward, toppling the entire structure. What you're about to witness is not just a recounting of events, but a careful examination of how the flawless facade begins to crumble under the weight of tiny inconsistencies, those fleeting moments that slip beneath the radar. As you follow the strands of this story, pay close attention not only to what is said but to what remains unsaid. The pauses between conversations, the hesitations that flicker in an otherwise steady gaze. These subtle signals are the cracks that start to appear in an otherwise impenetrable plan. They are the points where certainty falters, where control loosens its grasp, and where the truth begins to seep through. This case is a masterclass in how perfection can be undone, not by grand mistakes, but by the quiet oversights that seem insignificant at first glance. You'll find that the line between success and failure is razor-thin, dictated by details so small they might be dismissed, except they are not. Each fragment matters. Each moment holds weight, and it is precisely in these overlooked fragments that the unraveling begins. Consider yourself an investigator alongside those tasked with piecing this together. Watch closely and decide where the thread first pulls loose. Is it a word out of place? A gesture too quick to hide something? Or perhaps a shadow where none should be? The answer lies in the meticulous observation of these moments. If stories where meticulous plans fall apart because of one missed clue captivate your curiosity, you'll find yourself drawn deeper into this narrative. The truth, after all, is often hidden in the details waiting to be uncovered by those who refuse to look away. The apartment presented itself as an immaculate stage, frozen in time and devoid of any disturbance. Investigators entered with measured steps, their eyes scanning every surface, every corner, searching for the slightest hint of disorder. The door, a solid oak with no signs of tampering, stood shut behind them, its lock unblemished. No scratches, no splintered wood, no forced entry. It was as though the victim had invited the intruder in, or perhaps the intruder had been expected. Inside, the air was cool and still, unmarked by any struggle or sudden movement. The living room, spacious yet minimalistic, was exactly as one might expect from a carefully curated home. A leather armchair sat perfectly aligned with the low coffee table, which bore no fingerprints, no misplaced items, no overturned cups or shattered glass. The carpet underneath was pristine, without a single scuff or trace of hurried footsteps. Every book on the shelf was in place, spines uniformly facing outward, undisturbed. The faint scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered, but no cup was left abandoned. No stain betrayed haste or panic. The bedroom offered no further clues. The bed was made with clinical precision, the sheets pulled taut without a wrinkle. A single lamp cast a soft, steady light, its switch untouched. The window blinds were drawn, but not broken or forced, and the window itself locked securely. The closet doors stood closed, no sign of a hurried search or frantic concealment. Not a single garment was out of place. The air held no hint of confrontation, no residual tension. It was a room untouched by conflict. In the study, the scene was equally controlled. A polished desk bore an open journal, its pages neatly turned to a recent entry, ink smooth and uninterrupted. No smudges, no hurried scribbles, no hastily crossed-out lines. A pen lay beside it, uncapped but unused. The computer was powered down, screen dark and reflective. No signs of digital tampering, no forced logins or deleted files. The chair was pushed in, its wheels aligned with the edges of the desk. Here, too, the absence of chaos was conspicuous. Most notably, the absence of physical evidence was stark. Despite the thorough sweep, investigators found no fingerprints on any surfaces. Gloves, perhaps, were employed with precision. There were no footprints, no traces of hair, no fibers out of place. Not a single dropped item, no weapon left behind, no bloodstains or bruises visible on the walls or furniture. The entire apartment was a tableau of calm, untouched by violence, yet housing a crime that defied explanation. Every electronic device, from the security cameras to the smart home systems, showed no signs of hacking or bypass. The entry logs recorded no unusual activity. The alarm system, activated and functional, had not been tripped. Surveillance footage showed no unfamiliar faces approaching or leaving. It was as if the crime had occurred outside the boundaries of physical law, silent, invisible, flawless. The crime scene did not speak in the usual language of disorder or haste. Instead, it communicated through its eerie perfection. The absence of evidence was the evidence itself, a deliberate void where chaos should have erupted. This was a crime that did not merely avoid detection. It seemingly erased its own existence. Investigators exchanged glances, the weight of the scene settling upon them. This was not the work of a reckless intruder or a desperate act. It was a meticulously engineered event, designed to withstand scrutiny and evade capture. The flawlessness was not accidental. It was calculated, a challenge issued to those who sought the truth. Yet even in this controlled environment, the smallest details began to pulse with significance. The stillness was a silence pregnant with secrets. Somewhere within this immaculate frame, the first thread awaited its pull. The question was, who would find it first? And at what cost? From the outset, investigators found themselves confronting an intricate puzzle that defied conventional approaches. The scene offered no obvious entry points, no misplaced objects, no traces of haste or struggle. Standard forensic protocols, dusting for fingerprints, searching for fibers, analyzing footprints, yielded scarce results. The crime's architecture was deliberate, each element carefully positioned to confound detection. Detectives recognized that the perpetrator's preparation was not mere luck but a studied understanding of investigative techniques, aimed at neutralizing them entirely. One of the earliest challenges was the absence of physical evidence that typically anchors a case. There were no latent prints on surfaces that would normally harbor them: door handles, glassware, or personal items. The surfaces were wiped clean, yet not clumsily, indicating the perpetrator possessed knowledge of forensic practices. Investigators noted that any attempt to remove fingerprints had been executed with precision, avoiding chemical residues that could betray such efforts. This level of control suggested access to specialized cleaning agents and a thorough awareness of forensic detection methods. Beyond fingerprints, the lack of DNA evidence complicated matters further. No stray hairs, no skin cells, no bodily fluids were found at the scene. Investigators theorized that the perpetrator must have worn protective clothing designed to prevent shedding, such as full-coverage suits and gloves. The absence of trace biological material eliminated the possibility of standard DNA profiling, a cornerstone of modern criminal investigation. Without this, detectives were deprived of a fundamental tool for linking a suspect to the crime. Another factor that frustrated the investigation was the meticulous staging of the environment. Surveillance cameras that might have recorded movement either were absent, tampered with, or disabled in a manner that left no obvious signs of interference. The perpetrator appeared to have mapped the location extensively, identifying blind spots and timing their movements to avoid detection. Investigators acknowledged that any attempt to reconstruct the timeline based on witnesses or technology was rendered nearly impossible by this calculated manipulation. Digital forensics also presented a dead end. Devices found on site showed no signs of unauthorized access or digital footprints. The perpetrator seemingly avoided leaving metadata trails or electronic communications. Detectives concluded that any communication related to the event must have been conducted through secure, untraceable means, or entirely offline. The absence of digital leads underscored the level of sophistication behind the planning. Interviews with witnesses and associates failed to produce useful information. There were no inconsistencies or suspicious behavior patterns that could be leveraged, and those connected to the victim or location provided consistent accounts. Investigators surmised that the perpetrator had isolated the operation to minimize exposure and carefully controlled interactions to prevent leaks. The lack of motive or tension among acquaintances added another layer of complexity, leaving law enforcement without psychological angles to explore. Detectives reflected on the methodology employed, recognizing a pattern consistent with someone who anticipated every standard investigative response. By preemptively addressing each typical line of inquiry: physical evidence, surveillance, digital data, witness testimony, the perpetrator effectively dismantled the investigative framework before the first step was taken. This foresight transformed the crime scene into a void of actionable evidence. Over time, the weight of these obstacles led to a shift in investigative strategy. Without new leads, and with no breakthroughs in forensic analysis, enthusiasm waned. The case files grew dusty as detectives focused on more promising inquiries. Despite periodic reviews and sporadic tips, the trail remained cold. The meticulous planning that had once seemed almost arrogant had succeeded in placing the perpetrator beyond reach, leaving the investigation stranded in uncertainty. The investigation's early conclusions were stark. The crime was executed with a level of expertise that outmatched conventional law enforcement tools. The absence of physical, digital, or testimonial evidence meant there was no clear path forward. As months passed without progress, the case was downgraded, effectively entering an unresolved status. The silence at the heart of the scene endured, a testament to the perpetrator's ability to vanish within the very environment they had controlled so thoroughly. The precision behind the execution was anything but accidental. Every element had been meticulously aligned to fit within a rigid framework of timing and circumstance, ensuring the absence of loose ends that might unravel the carefully woven facade. The perpetrator had studied routines, both their own and those of potential witnesses, down to the smallest detail, embedding their actions within a predictable rhythm that masked the extraordinary beneath the ordinary. The planning phase began with an exhaustive analysis of daily patterns. Public transportation schedules, pedestrian traffic flows, and neighborhood activity cycles were all mapped to identify windows offering minimal exposure. This data was cross-referenced with personal routines to pinpoint moments when the environment could be controlled most effectively without arousing suspicion. The decisions were not impulsive but the product of deliberate, calculated assessments of risk and opportunity. To avoid detection, the perpetrator adopted a schedule that mimicked normalcy, moving through the day with seemingly mundane tasks that concealed the preparation. Each step was rehearsed, with contingencies laid out for potential disruptions. The timing of actions was synchronized with predictable distractions, routine maintenance, local events, or shifts in nearby security patrols, ensuring that attention would be diffused elsewhere when the critical moments arrived. Material acquisition was handled with equal care. Tools and items necessary for the execution were obtained incrementally, often from varied sources to avoid creating suspicious patterns. The selection of these materials reflected a preference for items that left no traceable origin, favoring anonymity over convenience. Storage was arranged in discrete locations, chosen for both accessibility and concealment, allowing for swift retrieval without attracting notice. The perpetrator's understanding of the environment extended beyond surface-level observations. Knowledge of surveillance blind spots, ambient noise patterns, and the behaviors of passersby informed the choice of location and timing. This spatial awareness was coupled with an internalized sense of pacing, ensuring movements were neither rushed nor hesitated, but calibrated to maintain a seamless flow that would not trigger alarm or curiosity. Communication, or rather the deliberate lack thereof, was another facet of the plan. Digital footprints were minimized, with no messages sent or received during critical periods. Devices were either powered down or left in locations unlikely to be associated with the individual, severing potential links between the perpetrator and the scene. Even social media activity was suspended, removing the possibility of inadvertent clues or time-stamped interactions. In the days leading up to the event, surveillance of potential obstacles was conducted discreetly. Observations of security personnel shifts, the habits of neighbors, and responses to environmental changes allowed for fine-tuning of the approach. The perpetrator avoided making any sudden changes to their own routine that might draw attention, instead weaving new behaviors into the existing pattern with subtlety designed to evade notice. Contingency plans were integral, with exit strategies mapped in detail to allow for rapid departure under varying circumstances. Routes were selected based on speed, anonymity, and familiarity, factoring in times when traffic would be lightest and pedestrian presence minimal. These plans accounted for possible interference, ensuring adaptability without compromising the core objective or introducing unpredictability into the timeline. Every action was executed with an understanding of cause and effect, each decision reflecting a controlled process rather than impulsive reaction. The deliberate pacing allowed the perpetrator to maintain composure, avoiding the pitfalls of haste or hesitation that often lead to errors. This control extended beyond the act itself, encompassing the entire preparatory phase with an unyielding focus on precision. The absence of evidence was no accident but the direct outcome of this rigorous planning. By embedding their actions seamlessly within the fabric of daily life and maintaining strict discipline over timing and behavior, the perpetrator ensured that the crime would remain a silent enigma. The methodical nature of the plan underscored a calculated intent, with no room for randomness or chance, revealing a mind operating with cold efficiency and unwavering control. In the days that followed, the investigation pressed on with a relentless, almost mechanical precision. Every alibi was tested, every route retraced, and every surveillance feed scrutinized frame by frame. The absence of conventional clues weighed heavily on the team, yet they clung to the belief that the smallest inconsistency would eventually surface. It was during one of these exhaustive reviews, hours lost in repetitive scans of the same footage, that a tiny anomaly flickered briefly on the edge of perception, almost imperceptible amid the flow of information. At first glance, it was nothing more than a fleeting blur, a smudge in the lower corner of a security camera's frame. The angle was awkward, the lighting poor, and the image barely registered as more than a glitch or a momentary lapse in the feed. The analysts, accustomed to sifting through far more obvious discrepancies, initially dismissed it without a second thought. It was a detail so minor it seemed to belong to the noise of the system rather than the narrative of the case. Yet, something about that brief irregularity refused to settle quietly in the background. It was as though the anomaly had a weight, a subtle insistence that it mattered in a way the surface of the investigation had not yet revealed. The timing was curious. appearing just before the pivotal moments when the perpetrator's carefully constructed timeline began to tighten. But there was no immediate explanation, no obvious connection to the movements or behaviors meticulously mapped out. The forensic team, initially preoccupied with more tangible leads, only revisited the frame after routine checks came back clean. The pixelated smudge, barely noticeable, was extracted and enhanced using software designed to clarify degraded images. Still, the result was ambiguous. No faces, no discernible objects, just a shifting mass of shadow and light. Without context, it was an enigma, an almost poetic reminder of how even the most sophisticated surveillance could fail to capture truth. What made the detail striking, however, was not its clarity but its inconsistency. It did not align with any known elements of the scene. The angle suggested a presence or movement that should not have been possible given the layout of the location and the timing established by other evidence. It was a whisper of something or someone operating outside the boundaries defined by the rest of the investigation. Despite this, the anomaly was relegated to a footnote, filed away alongside other minor irregularities too small to warrant serious scrutiny. It was a shadow in the corner of a room already filled with shadows, easily overlooked in the grand design of the crime's precision. The investigators, trained to prioritize patterns and concrete proof, moved on with their work, confident that the absence of direct evidence was itself a statement of guilt and control. But the anomaly lingered, a silent question mark etched into the digital record. As the days slipped by, a quiet unease settled among those who had glimpsed it. It was a detail that refused to fit, a piece that did not belong to the puzzle as they understood it. Was it a mistake, a flaw in the system? Or something more deliberate, a hidden signature, a concealed message embedded by the very mind that had orchestrated the perfect crime? The truth hovered tantalizingly out of reach, and as the investigators prepared to close yet another chapter of dead ends, the anomaly pulsed with quiet significance. It was a faint heartbeat beneath the surface of certainty, threatening to unravel the narrative meticulously constructed. What had been dismissed as meaningless suddenly became the key to unlocking everything, and the question remained: who or what was behind that flicker in the dark? The renewed investigation began quietly, almost imperceptibly, as a slow-burning ember reignited the team's determination. The scene, once thought exhaustively combed, now invited a fresh gaze, unclouded by the assumptions that had previously guided every step. The lead investigator, seasoned and steady, recognized that what was needed was not haste but patience, a methodical peeling back of layers with deliberate care. Returning to the location meant more than just retracing footprints. The team approached with humility, aware that the smallest overlooked detail could carry the weight of the entire case. They set up a grid system, dividing the area into manageable sections, ensuring no corner would escape scrutiny. Every inch was examined under new lighting techniques that revealed textures and traces invisible to the naked eye. Shadows once dismissed as artifacts of poor lighting now hinted at disturbances in the dust, subtle shifts that suggested movement and interaction. Experts from various fields were brought in, their presence a quiet testament to the complexity that had been underestimated. A forensic entomologist provided insight into the timeline through insect activity patterns, while a trace evidence specialist revisited fibers and particles collected in the first sweep, this time with advanced microscopes capable of higher resolution imaging. The team's combined expertise fostered an environment where hypotheses were tested rigorously, each idea subjected to the crucible of scientific skepticism. One of the most crucial elements in this re-examination was the willingness to challenge prior conclusions. The lead investigator encouraged open dialogue, pushing the team to question everything, including their own initial interpretations. This atmosphere of intellectual honesty was the fertile ground from which new understanding began to grow. Patience was paramount. They knew the truth rarely reveals itself in the first glance, and sometimes only emerges after enduring repetitive, painstaking analysis. Days turned into nights as the work persisted. The team cross-referenced new findings with original reports, looking for inconsistencies and connections that had slipped through earlier cracks. Digital reconstructions of the scene helped visualize spatial relationships, revealing inconsistencies in the timeline that had been accepted without question. It was in these subtle discrepancies that the breakthrough began to take shape, not through dramatic revelations, but through the steady accumulation of small, undeniable facts. A seemingly insignificant smudge on a windowsill, initially catalogued as a mere fingerprint smudge, was re-examined under a new method that differentiated between types of residues. The results suggested the presence of an unknown substance, one that had been overlooked because it didn't fit the expected profile. This discovery opened a new line of inquiry, connecting the dots between the evidence and the flicker of uncertainty that had first sparked the re-examination. The breakthrough felt less like a sudden epiphany and more like the final piece clicking into a puzzle long studied. Each member of the team felt the weight of the moment, not just for what it meant for the case, but for the painstaking journey it took to reach it. It was a reminder that in forensic work, progress often demands humility, relentless attention to detail, and the courage to revisit what was once considered settled. Through this meticulous reanalysis, the narrative began to shift. The story of what happened at the scene was no longer one-dimensional but layered and complex. The investigators, armed with renewed clarity and refined techniques, were closer than ever to unveiling the truth hidden beneath the surface. The faint heartbeat beneath the certainty was now a steady pulse, guiding them toward answers that had patiently waited to be uncovered. The seemingly insignificant detail, a faint smudge of a rare cosmetic powder found on the edge of the victim's desk, became the thread that unraveled the carefully woven alibi. At first, it was easy to overlook, a small residue that could have been dismissed as an incidental trace left by anyone who had been in the room. But the rarity of the powder was what made it crucial. Unlike common makeup products, this particular brand was exclusive, sold only at a single boutique in the city, and the investigators learned that only a handful of people owned it. This piece of information set the wheels turning with unmistakable clarity. Knowing the exclusivity of the powder, the team cross-referenced the boutique's customer records. The list was short, and her name appeared prominently in it. It was no coincidence that she had purchased exactly this product. This connection, however, was not enough on its own to dismantle her alibi, so the investigators looked deeper into the timeline and her movements that day. She had claimed to have been at a friend's house, supported by messages and brief phone calls. But none of those communications mentioned any makeup or the need to touch up her appearance, a detail they would later find significant. When forensic experts analyzed the smudge, they discovered it contained traces of a unique ingredient that reacts differently under specific lighting conditions. Ingredients only present in that boutique's powder. This scientific confirmation removed any lingering doubts about its origin. Investigators then matched footage from nearby security cameras. Though she was not seen entering the building at the time of the crime, a brief glimpse showed her exiting the boutique mere minutes before the estimated time of the incident. This contradicted her claim of being elsewhere during the critical window. The most damning evidence came from the victim's personal belongings. Among them was a small, torn piece of fabric with the same powder residue, suggesting a close physical encounter. It implied that whoever was present at the scene had worn this makeup and had been in direct contact with the victim. When questioned about this, she initially maintained her innocence, insisting she had left the area well before anything happened. But under pressure, inconsistencies began to emerge. A detailed examination of her phone revealed deleted messages attempting to coordinate with the friend she claimed to have been visiting, indicating a potential cover-up. Furthermore, the exclusive nature of the powder meant she was one of the very few who could have left that trace. No other person linked to the crime or the victim was known to use that product. This eliminated other suspects and focused the investigation squarely on her. The physical evidence, combined with the timeline discrepancies and digital footprints, created a logical chain that could not be broken by coincidence or supposition. As the investigators pieced these elements together, it became clear that the small detail, a speck of makeup powder, was the key that unlocked the truth. It connected her directly to the scene, disproving her alibi and exposing the lies that had initially shielded her. This discovery shifted the narrative entirely, transforming her from a peripheral figure into the central actor in the unfolding drama. It was a testament to how even the smallest detail, when examined with precision and care, can unravel deception and bring hidden truths to light. She stood motionless for a moment, the evidence laid bare before her, the weight of it pressing silently against her chest. No words came, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if trying to find an escape through the walls, through the air itself. The carefully assembled facade she had maintained fractured instantly, not with a dramatic outburst or a desperate plea, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible faltering. Her breath hitched slightly, irregular enough to betray the calm exterior she'd worked so hard to project. Her hands, which had been steady just moments earlier, now twitched involuntarily at her sides. She swallowed, a small, dry movement that did nothing to ease the constriction in her throat. For a long while, she simply stood there, unable to summon the rehearsed responses that had once come so easily. The silence stretched between them, dense, uncomfortable, and charged. Yet she made no move to break it. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for her to reclaim control, for the plan to be salvaged by some last-minute maneuver. But nothing came. Her eyes flickered downward, avoiding direct contact with those presenting the evidence. The scene etched into reality was undeniable. The carefully constructed narrative she had spun was dismantled by the incontrovertible facts now displayed. The alibi, the carefully timed statements, the plausible diversions, all collapsed under the weight of that single connection. A subtle shift passed over her features, not anguish or panic, but something more profound. A dawning recognition of the irrevocable. The control she had wielded so tightly slipped through her fingers with an imperceptible finality. There was no immediate reaction, no surge of anger or denial. Instead, a quiet hesitation filled the space where certainty once lived. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. It was a silence heavy with unspoken admission. The plan, so meticulously laid out, was unraveling in real time, and with it, the carefully maintained illusion of control. She was no longer directing the story. She was merely a character caught in its unfolding. Her posture slackened minutely, shoulders dropping as if the tension that had kept her upright gave way. The crisp, deliberate movements that had marked her presence before now gave way to a subtle trembling, barely noticeable, yet unmistakable to an attentive observer. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held a shadow of something unfamiliar: vulnerability. It was not a calculated performance but an involuntary response to the sudden collapse of the framework she had built around herself. Time seemed to stretch, each second marked by the absence of any assertion from her. The silence was not empty but loaded, filled with the weight of what had been lost. Certainty, control, and the story she had sought to control. In that suspended moment, the shift was complete. She was no longer the architect of the narrative but its subject, exposed and revealed. Eventually, her gaze lifted, meeting the steady eyes that held her accountable. There was no plea, no attempt to deflect blame. Instead, an unspoken acknowledgement passed through the quiet, a tacit acceptance that this was the point where control ended. The faintest tremor in her hands betrayed the internal struggle waging beneath the surface, but outwardly, she remained still, contained only by the thin veneer of composure that had yet to fully dissolve. Her breathing evened out slightly, though the tension remained, a subtle hum beneath the silence. It was a moment of profound stillness, not marked by noise or chaos, but by the quiet collapse of a carefully maintained world. The evidence did not need to be repeated. Its presence was enough to dismantle the story she had told herself and others. In the absence of words, the truth settled firmly, reshaping everything. She did not move to defend, explain, or deny. Instead, she simply existed in that fragile space between what had been planned and what was now unavoidable, her silence speaking volumes about the loss of control that had finally come to define her reality. Once the detail that dismantled the entire account was confirmed, the wheels of the legal process began turning with relentless momentum. Authorities moved swiftly to execute the arrest, armed with irrefutable proof that left no room for doubt. The subject, once composed and guarded, was taken into custody without resistance. The arrest marked a pivotal turning point, shifting the balance of power entirely. Where there had been uncertainty and speculation, there was now clarity, an undeniable convergence of facts that crushed the narrative carefully constructed in the preceding weeks. The arrest was methodical and precise, conducted under the watchful eyes of law enforcement officers who had spent countless hours piecing together the puzzle. The individual's demeanor during the proceedings was notably subdued, a stark contrast to the confidence once displayed. The silence, previously filled with calculated deflections and rehearsed statements, had given way to an uneasy stillness. The arrest itself was not sensational but carried a weight far heavier than any public spectacle, signaling the beginning of a process that would unravel the entire fabric of the case. As the case advanced into the pretrial phase, the prosecution prepared to present their findings. However, what followed was an unexpected unraveling. Defense attorneys meticulously scrutinized the evidence, identifying inconsistencies and procedural oversights that had been overlooked in the urgency to secure a conviction. The initial confidence of the prosecution was challenged by the emergence of new interpretations, raising questions about the integrity of certain elements within the investigation. While the core facts remained intact, the surrounding context became less certain, shaking the foundation of the case. The judicial process exposed cracks that had been invisible to the naked eye during the arrest. Witness testimonies began to falter under cross-examination, revealing contradictions that weakened the prosecution's stance. The timeline, once presented as airtight, showed gaps that defense experts exploited effectively. Forensic analyses were re-examined, and some conclusions were tempered by alternative explanations. The crescendo of doubt built gradually, eroding the prosecution's ability to maintain a cohesive argument. Consequently, the momentum shifted. The prosecution had to reassess its position as the defense gained ground by emphasizing the necessity of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The case, initially perceived as straightforward due to the apparent strength of the evidence, became increasingly complex. Legal maneuvers extended the proceedings, as motions were filed to exclude certain pieces of evidence on grounds of admissibility and chain of custody concerns. This procedural scrutiny further delayed resolution and added layers of complication. Behind the scenes, investigators revisited the scene and re-interviewed individuals connected to the case. Some new information emerged, though it did not drastically alter the facts but rather highlighted the ambiguity that had been underestimated. The cumulative effect of these developments was a gradual erosion of the prosecution's certainty. The narrative that had once been dominant was no longer unassailable. Ultimately, faced with mounting challenges and the diminishing likelihood of securing a conviction, the prosecution made the decision to withdraw the charges. The legal grounds for dismissal were grounded in the principle that continuing the case would not meet the standard required for justice. The withdrawal signaled a formal collapse of the case, closing a chapter marked by intense scrutiny and procedural rigor. The individual previously arrested was released, the shadow of the case lingering but no longer legally binding. Public reaction varied, but the legal system's role in navigating the complexities of evidence and procedure was underscored. The collapse of the case served as a reminder of the delicate balance between accusation and proof and the intricate mechanisms that govern the pursuit of truth within the justice framework. In the end, the entire elaborate scheme came crashing down because of one seemingly insignificant slip, a tiny detail overlooked in the grand design of a perfect crime. Despite the meticulous planning, the sophisticated cover-ups, and the layers of deception, it was this small fragment that unraveled everything. The accused, once shackled by suspicion and legal constraints, walked free not merely because of procedural technicalities, but because that overlooked piece of evidence cast enough doubt to shatter the prosecution's narrative. What was meant to be an unassailable fortress of facts became a fragile house of cards, collapsing under the weight of a detail so minor that it almost escaped notice. This case serves as a potent reminder that no matter how flawless a plan seems on paper, perfection in crime is an illusion. The tiniest detail, whether a misstep, a misplaced item, or a subtle inconsistency, can become the catalyst for failure. It highlights the fragile nature of criminal endeavors that rely on absolute precision. One small error can trigger a domino effect that brings the entire scheme into question. The justice system's role, then, is to navigate these complexities, balancing the need for evidence with the presumption of innocence, always aware that beneath every accusation lies a web of uncertainties. Moreover, This story challenges our fascination with the idea of the perfect crime. It reminds us that human error, chance, and unforeseen variables are ever-present forces that disrupt even the most calculated plans. The tiny detail that caused the collapse was not merely a stroke of luck but a testament to the intricate dance between truth and deception. It underscores the idea that while criminals may attempt to outsmart the system itself, through diligence, scrutiny, and persistence, relies on uncovering those small cracks to reveal the larger picture. For those who are captivated by tales of perfect crimes gone wrong, this narrative is a vivid illustration of how those almost perfect moments unfold. It invites us to look beyond the surface, to question every element, and to appreciate the complexity behind what seems like a straightforward case. Every detail, no matter how trivial it appears, holds the potential to tip the scales of justice. If you found yourself intrigued by how one tiny detail turned the entire case upside down, and if you enjoy unraveling the stories where perfect crimes don't quite go as planned, make sure to subscribe. Join a community that delves deep into the nuances of criminal mysteries, where every episode uncovers the fragile threads that hold these stories together. And while you're here, share your thoughts in the comments. Did you catch the detail that doomed the plan before it was revealed? Your insights could reveal just how sharp your eye really is. Don't miss out on future stories where the smallest details make the biggest difference.